Henry Clay, a senator from Kentucky who led Congress in working out the Missouri Compromise of 1820, presented his Compromise of 1850.
Well, the Compromise of 1850, which was a product of the genius of the great Henry Clay, known as the Great Compromiser, was supposed to be the final word on the question of slavery. Slavery was to be no longer an issue of debate in American political discourse. Unfortunately, the compromise was just that. It was a compromise. It was not a resolution. And it did not stop people in the North from thinking that somehow their interests had been shortchanged for those of the South.
Here's what his plan would do. Texas would relinquish its disputed territory, an area amounting to 1/3 of all its land. In exchange, Texas would receive $10 million from the federal government. The territories of New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, and Utah would be organized without mention of slavery. The decision to be slave or free would be left to the states. California would be admitted as a free state. The District of Columbia would no longer be a center for buying and selling of slaves, but slaveholding would still be permitted. Finally, as a compensation to those in favor of slavery, the Fugitive Slave Act would be made law. Of all the parts of the Compromise of 1850, the Fugitive Slave Act was the most controversial.
What particularly irritated the people of the North was the provision for a new Fugitive Slave Act, which now required Northerners to return runaway slaves to the South.
Not only were runaway slaves unallowable, that someone's labor force had disappeared, but that law enforcement was to return them. And if they knew of someone that had left, they were to return them, or they were held liable for that loss of labor. So it was very much slaves at that point were seen as instruments and tools of labor, not as human beings, not as those that would have equality at all.
The Underground Railroad was this movement to ferret slaves out of the South to the free territory of the North, and in some cases even into Canada. It had operatives like Harriet Tubman, who would help slaves to escape into the land of freedom. Slaves were often disguised, moved by night in wagons, or somehow put on ships and sent to ports where they would disembark to be met by groups in the North called vigilance committees, who would help them then establish themselves as free people in Northern Territory.
Speaking in favor of Clay's proposal, fellow Senator Daniel Webster, a very persuasive speaker, presented strong arguments in favor of the Compromise of 1850. The Senate passed the proposal, but it did not end the debate over slavery.